Hello and welcome to the incoming video podcast. This is episode 32, which looks back at the new releases for week ending the 29th of January 2010. As always, it's me, Neil Shook, bringing you the latest news of historical miniature releases. Apologies that this show is late. My weekend schedule for once just didn't allow me to record the audio in time, but I hope its lateness doesn't detract you from enjoying the show. A late surge of releases this week means that my job was made slightly harder than normal. Hopefully we've got some decent models in store for you. So let's kick it all off starting at number 10, and almost a feeling of deja vu, as here we are with Foundry, with a range of Zulu models. These are, but as I say, deja vu because we saw almost a similar release from Empress last week. These are Foundry's versions of native police, mounted volunteers, and various other civilians and alternative troops, including artillery crew, rocket crew, heliograph. Not a great release this at all, I think, from Foundry. A nice enough range, but the sculpts themselves are very strange. Quite diminutive in some ways. Huge hands on most of them. Almost seem almost caricaturish in some ways. You know, smaller bodies, big heads, big hands. So yet again, Foundry is showing off the fact that although they're still out putting out lots of ranges, I really don't think they're the force they once were in the hobby. The only saving grace some would say in this release, after such discussion about the size of the helmet spikes on the Empress Miniatures last week, at least the spikes on these helmets are a little bit more to the correct size. But if that's the only good thing you've got to say about them, it's not great, is it? Number 9, and one of several vignettes that have been released from Wargames Illustrated. Now they've released 6 of these in total this week. This is one of my favourites. This shows the battle between Achilles and Hector at the gates of Troy. And indeed, one could almost question whether this should be in the historicals at all, or whether it should be more consigned to fantasy. And indeed, the sculpt and pose themselves is very reminiscent of a particular shot from the film, except much more sensibly. In this particular vignette, both characters have chosen to retain their helmets. I like the pose because of its dynamic nature. And whilst I think the anatomy is a little bit lacking, especially around the legs of Hector, on the whole, a decent enough vignette. On to number 8, and the latest release from Emke Art. These are more Württemberg Chevaux Légers. If you remember, we saw the first of these a couple of 3 weeks ago. And Uwe Emke has continued to release a fantastic set of 28mm figures, with more command figures promised soon. Great miniatures to look out for you 28mm Napoleonic fans. On to number 7, and a complete change of scale, down to 6mm. These are new releases from Baccus. These are actually from the resculpted Hittites. Here we have Hittite infantry and Hittite archers. Pete this year is committed to starting to resculpt a lot of his Ancients range. His Ancients range is actually fairly long in the tooth, and if he does the same job as he has done with his Napoleonics, I think we're in for a real treat. These are a great example of what's in store. Baccus continued to be a real front runner when it comes to sculpting 6mm figures. Great stuff. Number 6, and we have several new releases this week from Mutineer Miniatures. Now, we saw the first of their ranges for British troops from the Indian Mutinies a few weeks ago. Here we have their next set of releases, which include a couple of command packs, some Bengal horse artillery, and finally a pack of mutineers with Brown Bess rifles. I think these are generally a pretty decent looking set of figures. A couple of the sculpts look a little caricaturish, but generally a really good job. Not my particular period, it has to be said. But I'm sure if your period is the Indian Mutinies, then I'm sure you'll find these figures of great interest. Into the top 5, and we come back to company I feature a lot of. These are Khurasan. Interesting new release, these. These are pre-samurai Japanese infantry from the later Kofun period. So we have a command pack, some armoured foot archers, and finally some spearmen. Interesting release, this. It's interesting to see Japanese infantry that predate samurai, and it's interesting to see sculpts that are a little out of the ordinary. Certainly the spearmen are somewhat rotund when it comes to their anatomy, but lots to choose from as far as these figures are concerned. Certainly a very interesting subject, and yeah, I like these a lot. On to number 4, and it's back to another release from Wargames Illustrated. This is by far my favourite vignette, and this shows Monty and Rommel facing off together, funnily enough, over a Wargames table. And in this particular case, a classic sand table. But I just think this is superb. Obviously, an ironic vignette in a lot of ways. Here we have two generals who fought over the sands of North Africa, fighting over a sand table, and I just think it is a superb miniature, this one. Really like it a lot. Shows bags of character. There's just something about this figure that really appeals to me, and I find it tremendous fun. Absolutely fantastic. So into my top 3, and we have another release from Red Star. Now, Red Star have been producing some Russians and some Chechens. These are their latest releases of Chechen Rebels, and yet again I think you'll see that they have on the whole a fantastic set of releases here. Figures with a tremendous amount of character, although as I say, not all particularly dynamic from a battlefield point of view, but chock full of character. Not convinced by all the sculpts. The guy on the far left in this particular picture, the face doesn't look quite right. Can't put my finger on why, but it just doesn't look right. However, on the whole, fantastic sculpts from Red Star. Another great range of 28mm moderns. Really good stuff. Number 2, and another release from Empress Miniatures. Hot on the heels of their Natal Native Police from last week. Now we have a couple of sets of artillery crew. Here we have a 7-pounder artillery crew, both loading and firing. And finally, a mounted battery commander with a sergeant major on foot. Superb models again from Empress. Their Zulu range really is excellent. No other word for it. Fantastic detailing. Again, great horse sculpts. In this particular case, I think it has to be said the battery commander looks a little small maybe, especially on his upper torso, but maybe he's just a small bloke. It's difficult to say really. But as I say, another fantastic release from Empress. These are my number 1s for most of the week. And it was only with a very late entry from my next sculptors that stole the number 1 slot at the very last minute. Great release again from Empress. Well done, guys. And on to that number 1, and yes, it's the Perrys. Following on from their fantastic release of their plastic Wall of the Roses range, we now see their first metals, and we have of their mounted command, and some of these are just superb, aren't they? 4 sets of command figures really for me culminate in the sculpt of Richard III in the middle on the 4th shot here. That is just a superb figure. And what really confirms that for me is that if ever you find yourself in Leicester, just on the outskirts of the city centre, there is actually a statue of Richard III. And the facial features on this model are very reminiscent of that. You can tell they've really gone away and done the homework on the face and the armour. Despite the fact it's riding a horse or what have you, it's that statue. You can see it right there. And that for me just captures it. The Perrys, always fantastic sculpts. The War of the Roses is one of my favourite periods. And here we are, just another fantastic set in their first models. We've seen the artillery before. Now fully produced in metal. Great stuff from the Perrys. Fantastic things to come in their War of the Roses range. A well-worthy number 1. Well, there you have it. That's my top 10 for this week. It was a very quiet until very late on Thursday and Friday. I mean, we had a lot of entries coming in late. But some excellent stuff. I'm sure you'll agree. And so that's it till next week. Before I go, I want to say a huge thank you to Bill at the Miniatures page, Zach at Tabletop Gaming News. Thanks, guys. Without your websites, this show just simply wouldn't be possible. If you want to catch it again, look out for it on Warboots TV. So until next week, have a great week. Happy gaming. I'll speak to you soon. Bye.